Hello, everybody. It's Friday, and that means it's time for another topic of the week. Turning, of course, at first to last week's topic, which was about GW's community outreach and everything that came out of the Gamma trade show. A lot of good responses there. It seems like most of it was pretty positive. One video in particular I want to point you to that I thought was awesome, although there were many great responses, was Hooves of Doom response. If you haven't watched Hooves' yet, make sure, as always, you go back to last week's video, which will be linked below, and find his video, which is linked in there, and check it out. And if you're not already subscribed to Hooves, you should do so. But what I loved about his was he went way back in time, and he talked about some of the former programs that I had forgotten all about until he mentioned them. But they were some of the stuff that was there when I started playing it back in the 90s. And he talked about like the collection of points when you bought stuff, and the fact that you eventually got a Bane Blade when you spent enough money, which, the giant 40k tank, which you have to understand, like at that time period, that thing was like a rare white elk. I mean, like you didn't see those things around. It just wasn't a thing. Or at least I didn't. I mean, because when you're a poor college student, it's not really exactly like Bane Blades falling out everywhere. So even the dream that you would eventually be able to go crew one was pretty awesome. So go check out Who's video, and you can see sort of the long history of everything that they've done in some of their previous community outreach programs. But let's turn to this week's topic. So earlier in the week, the Sustainable Center put up a video that was caused some controversy, and there's been a lot of discussion about various things surrounding it, and it was all about core. And then today, all of the changes for the Order line that are coming in advance of the Order Grand Alliance Battle Tome happened. So a bunch of stuff went to Last Chance to Buy. So I will say, if you had wanted to pick up some of the elements of Order that are being cut, especially like old special characters, I would go hit that right now. But several of the things that got cut were maybe some of the more traditional core units, like High Elf Spearmen and Archers and Lothern Sea Guard, things like that. The Empire Knightly Orders, Reichsguard Knights, all those went to Last Chance. I didn't find much of that surprising, but nonetheless, a lot of those were the traditional core of the army. So those two things kind of got me thinking about core. And even though there's no core anymore in the Age of Sigmar, like that is to say, there's not that restriction of that kind of build. Certain games are using other elements. Like there's different incentive structures out there. Certainly, Ninth Age still has a hard core, and Kings of War uses a sort of different mechanism around the regiments and hordes and what they unlock and open up and things. But it made me think about the nature of what core represents, and that was a lot of the discussion that I found fascinating, because to me it's always been interesting of what that thing represented beyond it having a staple like a game term, right? I'm not as much concerned with its role in the game or the incentive to pick it, but rather it's what it represents in sort of the verisimilitude of the world. Because core to me always, it's simultaneously the most interesting thing and the least interesting thing. And to me, it's always had a tension, right? Because on one hand, it sort of represents the kind of, I'll use this term even though it's not always true, but it's the everyman of the race, or the every elf, or the every orc, right? It's just sort of the standard warriors. So it gives you the tone and tenor of the army. But simultaneously, it's also the least interesting thing, right? Because it is sort of the nameless, faceless dudes. And so there's always been this interesting tension between the heroes, which are powerful and unique and perhaps even narratively interesting, but at the same time don't really represent the army that you love, whereas the core represents the army or the concept of the army, but is really just a bunch of faceless guys. So what I wanted to talk about this week was what you think of sort of what the traditional core troops have been. Your spearmen, your halberdiers, your archers, the unnamed masses, right, of the game, those are still certainly around in the Age of Sigmar. There's plenty of scrolls of just dudes. Whether it be the humble clan rat or, say like the Liberator and even the new Stormcast, or just like a Blood Reaver, or just a Warrior of Chaos, which is, what passes, I suppose. Or I guess maybe even a Marauder. How about that? Either, I suppose, suffices. the sort of bulk, right? When you think of like the army in the world, it's that force that you would see composing most of the force probably as they walked across the land, regardless of what your individual battle looks like. If they're sort of marching, you would just kind of picture them being the most of the stuff. So so my questions for this week are the following: do you like including a bunch of those types of troops in your games? And again, like, I don't care about the math of whatever game you play because it doesn't really matter. I'm not talking about the restrictiveness or the build of it and what rules there are. I mean, do you like having them on the table? Does it mean something to you to have those troops there, regardless of what the rules tell you to do? Okay? Is it valuable to you? Does it make you feel like you're playing that army? Um, are there particular core troops that you think really stand out? One of the things Ant mentioned as being unique, and it's something I have always had a deep love of, was Tomb King's chariots, right? Which have traditionally been a core and unique thing for them. And I've always loved that they had chariots. I thought it was a cool element. It was really fun, and I did play big giant blocks of chariots in 8th edition, and for people who say they weren't good, yeah, they sometimes sucked, but sometimes 12 chariots really will do the work. Um, so that certainly would be mine for like my favorite core unit. But even things like I'll be honest, like when it comes to sort of the traditional rank and file Humies of the world, I've never really found any of them that interesting. I never liked running spearmen or halberdiers or even knights. I always kind of found them to just be that, like, just boring. Um, I think what I always loved is when you could build a specific army and like shift a weird troop into core. Like when you have a general that can make, say take Empire. You had a general that could make Flagellant's core or something. That's been something that's popped up multiple times throughout the history of editions. Um, because those guys, those lunatics, were always more interesting to me than a bunch of dudes in floofy pantaloons. But maybe you love the floofy pantaloons. So what is that core troop that really stands out to you, right? What is that backbone of the army that you love? Maybe it's the wild, crazy orc boy who's just out to do some bashing. There's lots of great examples around there. Um, and then, sort of finally, with them, with the rules, is how much of it do you like to see on the table? Not just do you like to have it, because you could like to have a few units. How much of it do you like to see? Do you want your army, again, regardless of the rules, do you want your army to be, take your perfect world, make the rule structure whatever you want, okay? If you could construct your perfect world, would the majority of your army be those guys? Be sort of the basic troop of whatever army you're representing? Or is just a unit or two fine for you and you like playing with big, special, unusual, weird things? So that's what we're talking about. It's all about the backbone of the world, right? The backbone of the armies. The basic trooper, the 11 Bravo sort of guy, right? The soldier who is just fighting a war that's probably way over his head and trying desperately to survive to eventually get promoted. So there you go. That's this week's topic. Look forward to your responses in the discussion below. And as always, we'll see you next time.